imagine having a daughter who seems perfectly normal in every way, and suddenly she starts having violent, unexplained seizures?
One family is going through this ordeal right now, and home reporter Andy Naden has met up with them. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Gary.
Good morning.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi there. That was quite a story for you, wasn't it?
This is an amazing story of medical miracles, tremendous personal courage, and even childhood advocacy. We've been following the family of Joe and Sindi Rosales as their young daughter, Jessica, confronts a major and catastrophic illness that suddenly attacked her this summer. Prior to this year, Jessica was a happy and healthy 12-year-old girl who was competitive in sports and who excelled in school. And one day, without warning, Jessica's left side of her body started convulsing, and she was diagnosed with pediatric epilepsy. The problem was that the neurosurgeons felt that this form of epilepsy was incurable. It's extremely rare, and she would atrophy. She would eventually become retarded, and she could die from this disease.
Wow.
Now, Jessica's a fighter, and so is her mother, and they weren't going to take no for an answer, so they set out to find the cure, to treat Jessica and the doctors who could help her. So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to follow the long and emotional medical journey as Jessica travels from San Antonio, Texas, to the Johns Hopkins Children's Center in Baltimore, Maryland, as she and her family seek a miracle cure. For most of us, the first thing we notice about Jessica Rosales is the nonstop shaking and twitching. But until last July, that wasn't the case. It was then that the bright, vivacious 12-year-old's life suddenly changed forever.
Jessica had a seizure that looked almost like she was playing. You know, almost like she had just learned how to do a new trick with her face. It was that benign looking.
It was anything but benign. A few months later, without warning, Jessica suffered a grand mal seizure. As her mother and father watched helplessly and in horror, the daughter's body erupted in violent convulsions.
I thought my child was dying. I mean, it was so ugly, and it was so scary and frightening.
It hurts as a parent because it hurts me seeing my little girl the way she was. Seeing her, how healthy she was at the beginning, you know, for her first 11 years of life.
My seizures include my mouth and my eye twitching, and my hand and my leg jerking, and my mouth feels kind of funny, and I can't feel my arm or my leg.
Tests turned up a general diagnosis of pediatric epilepsy, and medication did not completely alleviate the symptoms. It was then that Sindi, despite being told that there was no hope for Jessica, became determined to cure her daughter's condition.
This thing attacked the wrong kid. It messed with the wrong child. It messed with my child, and it just picked the wrong one to mess with. And we're going to be the ones to beat it.
When Jessica's mother was informed that her child had pediatric epilepsy, she immediately researched everything she could at a medical center library. She quickly discovered that most of the articles were written by doctors here at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center in Baltimore, Maryland. The Rosaleses decided to bring Jessica to Johns Hopkins for treatment, and shortly after their arrival, a diagnosis was made. Jessica has Rasmussen syndrome.
Rasmussen's syndrome, or Rasmussen's encephalitis, is a very rare kind of epilepsy, which looks like it starts at one point in the brain and eats its way out, just like a Pac-Man eats its way out. And it involves more and more of the brain.
The Rosaleses were told that their daughter's condition causes untreatable seizures, and in later stages, paralysis and mental retardation. The seizures are frequent and debilitating. They attack fiercely and suddenly, as we discovered during our interview with Jessica.
Get her. Something. I'll just hold her.
Immediately after learning of their daughter's life-threatening illness, the Rosaleses were hit by a second bombshell. There is only one known cure for Rasmussen syndrome, and the treatment is extremely drastic.
It's cured by taking out half of the brain. This makes no sense at all. To cure a virus by removing half of the brain, it's the only thing that works.
This was a child who was so healthy, perfectly healthy, I always brag, never even had a cavity. And all of a sudden now they're telling me they need to take out half of her brain in order to save her life. It just sounded like this just can't be true. You know, it can't be true.
But after watching Jessica deteriorate, the Rosaleses made the agonizing decision to go ahead with the surgery. Now, all Cindy and Joe can do is put their trust into the doctors who will treat their little girl and put their faith into God, who they believe will watch over her.
Just gotta have faith, and hopefully everything turns out all right.
I tell you, this was so incredibly touching, and what courage her parents have. But of course, the first thing that goes through your mind is, what effect is it going to have on her having half of her brain removed?
Well, initially, she will lose the movement on the opposite side of the body. Your right brain controls your left side, and your left brain controls your right. So in Jessica's case, she will not be able to move anything on her left side of her body. But eventually...
Wait. I thought you said she was having the seizures on the left side.
That's correct.
Okay.
So now that they remove the right brain,
oh, I see.
She will initially be paralyzed. She will eventually get her leg back, full movement, and her arm, and her hand. But the only thing that she will lose forever are the fine motor skills in her fingers. She won't play classical guitar, but she can do anything she wants.
What other functions does the right brain have?
Well, essentially, they say the right brain is the creative part
yeah.
and the left brain, but there's a lot of redundancy in the brain. For example, our memory's in our frontal lobe. So if they remove half the brain, we still have our memory. So there's a recuperative process that goes on that some of the doctors are even amazed by.
Wow. So in other words, in a perfect world, she has the surgery and she'll be able to do all the things she would normally have been able to do, except for the little motor skills you're talking about?
She'll be able to achieve all of her dreams and her family's wishes. She'll go to college. We followed some other children, and they're even dancing and creative and doing all the things that they want.
Now, Andy, is this something that only affects children?
Amazingly, it only affects children. That's why the pediatric hospitals have become expert in this. And also, interesting and disquieting is that it generally affects little girls.
Wow,
okay.
That's something.
One final thing before we have to say goodbye, and that is, what happens to the other half of the brain, the cavity that's left?
You know, I asked if they fill that up with some type of device or some type of
or if it's necessary.
But they say that it actually fills up itself with spinal fluid. The body has tremendous recuperative powers.
And especially at that age.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The younger, the better.
Well, next week, Andy's going to be back to continue this amazing story as Jessica enters the operating room. Thank you so much.
Andy.
We'll see you next week.
Surgical procedure to remove half her brain. The Rosaleses chose the operation.
I just can't stand to see my little girl deteriorate and suffer every day.
This thing attacked the wrong kid. It messed with the wrong child. It messed with my child, and it just picked the wrong one to mess with. And we're going to be the ones to beat it.
Don't be afraid.
It's the day before the surgery, and Jim, Cindy, and Jessica are all getting more nervous. It's hard to believe that Jessica's seizures will end tomorrow, just as it is hard to believe that half of her brain will be removed. Are you afraid?
A little.
I'm terrified. I am completely terrified. I don't think that it's likely that anything bad will happen, but I know that it's entirely possible that something will happen.
The 8-hour operation involves sawing through the skull and then removing the inflamed side of the brain with a tiny vacuum. Amazingly, all memory, speech, and intelligence is transferred to the other half of the organ.
And can you wiggle your fingers? Good job. Can you touch the back of your head? And touch your back. Good job.
The surgery does leave the opposite side of the body temporarily paralyzed. In Jessica's case, that will be her left side. But physical and other types of therapy help restore everything to normal except for the fine motor skills in her left hand. What is the long-term prognosis of children who have hemispherectomies?
The long-term outcome seems to be very good. These children, once their seizures are controlled by taking out the brain, have no more seizures. They come off medicine. They go back to school.
Let's walk to Daddy. There you go.
Are you a goose?
Give him a hug. Give him a big hug. Yeah.
Living proof of the success of this radical surgery is 3-year-old Jody Miller. She too was diagnosed with Rasmussen syndrome and underwent a hemispherectomy last November. Before the operation, she was basically crippled by the disease. Now, she is slowly but surely returning to a normal way of life.
She can walk now. She couldn't walk for 2 months before the surgery. She can move her arm. She's limited, but we're working on it. Yes, you can move your leg. Yes, you can. Very good.
The goal at Johns Hopkins is to meet the medical and the emotional needs of its young patients. Part of the preparation for surgery involves matching a family who's been through the operation with one that's about to go through it. For the Rosaleses, their match with the Millers was a godsend.
Thanks for sharing Jody with us. You know, having her and seeing her was such a wonderful inspiration. It gave us all kinds of hope, knowing that Jessica was going to come out of this with great success. She was going to have a great, wonderful, productive life. Thank you for sharing her with us.
What would you say to other kids who might be facing a serious operation?
Just have faith.
Are you ready for the operation tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh, honey, don't be scared.
Morning has broken and the time has come.
This seizure will be her last seizure. Okay?
You ready? You're ready for this, aren't you?
At Disney World.
Yeah.
To me, as a parent, I can't see my little girl suffering or deteriorating worse.
I do know that she's so strong and she's such a little fighter that if out of all the children that have ever had this before, she'll do the best in it, better than any of them. I'm convinced of that.
Now, only happy thoughts, okay? Happy thoughts.
Boy, oh boy. How you doing?
That's a tough one.
You went through this with Colin, didn't you?
Yeah, he was 4 months old. Yeah.
And he
You
had-
know, it was really nice as I saw that at John.
I mean, not the
John-
same procedure, but you went through surgery at 4.
Skull
but-
surgery, yeah. And they let the parents go in the operating
Yes, the
room. They
Johns
wouldn't let me
Hopkins-
go.
They wouldn't. The Johns Hopkins Children's Center is one of the only pediatric hospitals that will allow parents into the operating room during anesthesia. They figure there's a very small risk of infection, but there's a great risk of trauma. So you may have noticed that the mother and the father are there to soothe the child. They actually have an anteroom for the small children where they can actually rock their children to sleep with the IV.
And she was so brave, this youngster. There toward the end, I sensed from the film that she really, then she became frightened.
Yeah.
Yes, Jessica is a bright and beautiful and articulate young girl. Her father told me she's very competitive, and during the first few weeks of filming, she never flinched.
Yeah.
You may have remembered that she had an epileptic seizure during our first interview, and immediately thereafter, the crew was going to say, well, we'll wait, and she said, no, I want to do this. I want to tell the story. It doesn't hurt me, and I'm okay. But the doctors predicted that there would be a time that she would succumb to the pressure.
Little girl
she would
again.
become a little girl. I think that one of the things in the hospital for me is when you see all the small faces from 3 years old to 16, is that they seem to have a certain maturity and wisdom beyond their years.
Absolutely.
It's very disquieting.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there must be some similar reaction for kids who've been through the war or some other type of trauma.
That
You
they're
find
able
out
to-
that
they're
Santa
able to
Claus isn't
handle.
always
How
there.
long does this procedure take?
Well, basically, it can take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. This is the most invasive surgery known to man. It's the removal of part of the brain.
Right.
So they have neurosurgeons and anesthesiologists and many other pediatric specialists in the room.
Yeah. Now, what are her chances now of full recovery?
Well, from some of the other girls that we've spoken to, we find out that in about a week, they get to sit up straight. In about a month, they'll get their leg and their arm back. Eventually, they'll get most of the skills in their hand except the fine motor skills. So what they might do in the future is have a fork that has a large sponge around it so they can close and work on their own.
Yeah.
They will be totally independent. Their mind will work completely well, and you basically are snatching life out of the jaws of this illness.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Now,
right,
now, well, you're going to follow the story. How long will it take before we can find out what the results will be for her?
Well, the doctors say 1 week is good, 2 weeks is better. So we're going to go back and next week and meet with Jessica and see how she's doing and follow up with her parents and report back to you.
Thanks, Andy. All right,
Please
well,
do.
we will
our
continue
prayers are with them.
to
all
follow
of
this
them.
story.
Thank
Keep you
you.
posted
Good
on
luck,
Jessica's
Jessica.
recovery. Again, what a story. So stay with us.
Center in Baltimore. It's finished. The right half of Jessica's brain is gone. Now, only time will tell how she will respond.
This is the diagnosis they got at the Mayo Clinic.
You ever watching the Super Bowl game in your room?
Just
I know you slept through the whole thing. Couldn't believe it.
It's now 2 weeks after the surgery. Before the operation, Jessica's constant shaking was her most obvious trait. Now, her stillness is her most striking feature. Do you feel a lot better now that you're not seizing?
Yes.
Is it amazing?
Yeah.
I want you to tell me the number of the picture that depicts the vocabulary word, okay?
The surgery was a success. Other than being temporarily bedridden by a blood clot, Jessica's recovery is remarkable. The paralysis, which grips the left side of her body, will pass. Despite losing half her brain, she suffers no loss of speech or memory. And what's most amazing about that is the utter mystery behind the process.
I think that the technology of removing half the brain is far ahead of our understanding of how that other side takes over. That's a long way of saying, I don't know, but it is amazing, isn't it?
What have the doctors told you about Jessica's progress?
It'll be slow, and we're already seeing that. We're now 2 weeks out, of course, and it is slow. And I don't think I was prepared, even though I knew it. I don't think in my heart I knew what paralyzed really meant.
I'd like you to take your right arm, and I'd like you to grab your left one real tight as you can.
Now begins the long and arduous therapy to thaw the temporarily frozen left side of Jessica's body. With work and time, she will walk, even run. The one thing she'll never regain is the full use of her left hand, and that was a trade-off she understood and accepted.
No matter how long and how much rehab she gets, she knows she'll always be just a little bit different from the way she used to be. But when you ask Jessica today, is she glad she did it? And she'll say yes, she is.
Before her surgery, Jessica shared a room with Rory McCormick, a 10-year-old girl who had just undergone a hemispherectomy. Seeing Rory just after her operation helped Jessica come to grips with some of her own fears. Now, Jessica is able once again to draw upon Rory's strength.
Good job, Rory. How's your knee feel?
Because Rory is doing great. She's learning how to walk again and feeling more upbeat about her recovery.
How are you feeling now physically?
I'm feeling a lot better.
How about mentally? Are you worried anymore?
No.
Jessica has kept up on Rory's progress, and that relationship does wonders for her attitude, because she knows that soon, as soon as next week, she'll be up and about too, slowly learning how to walk again. After that, her future is wide open, and given her determination, that future looks very bright.
What are your greatest hopes and aspirations for Jessica now that she's completed this surgery?
Seeing her go back to school and play with her friends and graduate, I think she's going to do great.
I feel like my long-term hopes for Jessica are that she achieve everything that she wants to. But I think that she's going to be wonderful in some kind of a professional position where she is going to help children or people overcome difficulties.
I want to learn how to help people deal with things like this.
Think you want to be a doctor?
Mm-mm.
What would you like to be?
Maybe a psychiatrist.
So that little half smile will become a full smile.
Yes. Eventually she'll get the complete use of the left side of her body, and it slowly but surely comes back to her.
Why not the left hand? Is that because it's a much finer motor skill?
Yes, because our leg and our arm are basic movements, and the fine motor skills are really what separate us from a lot of other species.
But what an incredible recovery. There's been a lot of reaction to this story, hasn't there?
Yes, Hopkins has already received many calls from across the country, and they're anticipating over 100 inquiries from parents with children who have pediatric epilepsy to see if this procedure is right for them. But I'm happy to report that there was one particular family in Rhode Island where a young girl who knew about the surgery and was hesitant has now agreed to go forward.
Okay, well, when we come back, our cameras were there when the young girl met Jessica, and we'll see all of that, and we'll find out how that meeting changed her life and her whole attitude.
Yeah, really changing it. So, Andy, tell us about the meeting between Jessica Rosales and Lisa Segerson.
Well, this was a young girl from Rhode Island who actually knew about the surgery. Her father contacted Hopkins 2 months before our program aired, but the mother and daughter were terrified to go through this radical surgery. But as a result of our coverage and seeing Jessica's story, Lisa had the strength to come to Baltimore and visit her. And we were there when Jessica passed that torch to Lisa Segerson and her family.
There they are. Oh, my gosh, look. She's out of her bed now.
Yes, whenever a young patient comes to Hopkins, they're always introduced to another family that's been through the procedure before. You may recall that Jessica was introduced to little Jody Miller.
Right.
And now Jessica is now returning the favor and casting bread upon the waters.
What is Lisa giving to Jessica now?
She's giving her a little Disney hat because that's her favorite toy. In fact, we gave her a little Mickey Mouse calendar. We called it a recovery calendar because when she's finished marking all the X's, she'll be cured.
Now, I don't see any tremors with Lisa.
Well, she's heavily medicated and almost in what they call a toxic condition.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
But eventually, she'll come.
And that's the only other cure or at least treatment known right now.
That's
for
correct.
this problem.
This is remarkable, Andy.
This story...
Well, we're going to stay with Jessica, right? And follow her progress.
This story
You'll be there.
really is much more than a medical miracle. It's almost a roadmap of personal courage.
Thank you, Andy Maiden, very much.
Andy,
And
thank
Jessica,
you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Jessica, good luck to you. Take care.
After 8 months of anguish and worry, hope springs eternal again in Converse, Texas, because the Rosales' prayers have finally been answered. Jessica is coming home.
Hey, Jess.
Seeing Jessica now, it's hard to believe that she was ever seizing. Although she still suffers the expected paralysis on the left side of her body, Jessica's recovery, by any standards, has been amazing.
The therapists at the rehab center are saying she shouldn't be doing this. She shouldn't be doing this. We have thrown away the textbooks and we're letting Jessica do what she can do. They are just astounded at her progress.
Come on, precious. We missed you, Jessica.
Jessica still tires easily, but mentally she has totally recovered, and the seizures are completely gone. Now that you're on the road to a full recovery, do the seizures seem like a dream?
Yes. Because it seems like this is such a major surgery that I knew that there was a chance I might have died in the operating room. And it's a big miracle that I pulled through it. And I pulled through all the recovery at Johns Hopkins, and now I'm at home learning how to get around again, and then I'll be going back to school, getting my life back together.
Despite her fears, Jessica is doing great. She feels the ordeal has had a positive impact and made her a stronger person.
Catch that.
Nice.
At first I was a chicken. I wouldn't even go down a water slide at a water park. And now I'm a brave girl.
Jessica's recovery is a miracle, but the miracle might never have occurred if it weren't for the tenacity and determination of her mother, Cindy.
I didn't have a clue to how to start. The idea of being able to go to a computer and go into the card catalog file and all this, I didn't know how it was done. One thing that I've learned is that you can never ask too many questions. You can never ask too many people for help. Talk to anyone who will listen and never take no for an answer.
Who does Matt Garcia like so far?
Nobody.
Do you know who he asked to the dance?
No.
Laura Phillips.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure. I think he dumped her or she dumped him, one or the other. I'm not sure which.
Although the road to recovery looks promising, there are still many unanswered questions about Jessica's future.
I just know that Jessica is going to continue to be faced with challenges all throughout her life. When it's going to be time to drive, when it's going to be time to go to the prom, I sit here and I worry, is someone going to ask her to the prom? Is she going to have lots of friends? Is she going to be watching sports or playing in sports? Those are my concerns.
For Joe Rosales, Jessica's life-threatening illness has given him a new perspective on fatherhood.
Spend as much time as you can with your daughter and all your children that you have with, because if you take them for granted, you don't know what's going to happen. Don't take your kids for granted.
I think a lot of what I'm feeling is a very mournful, grieving process of losing my child as I once knew her, but yet rejoicing that I have her as she is now.
Baby, can you tell him what you gave up for Lent?
Rasmussen.
Jessica's back.
Oh, gosh, what a wonderful story. You know, I think as a mom, Sindi Rosales' story is just as courageous as her daughter's. I mean, she really stepped forward and tackled something that was seemingly humongous,
Yes.
enormous to
Looking back now, I'm not sure what's more amazing, the medical miracle at Johns Hopkins or the family's determination to get her there. I think it is important to realize that this cure was not handed to the Rosales on a silver platter. They had to struggle to find it. And I think that's the essence of childhood advocacy. And it doesn't matter whether the problem is medical, as in Jessica's case. It could be financial, emotional, or academic. For me, the moral of the story is you can always help your child if you're willing to work together and you're determined to find an answer.
Right, let's once again remind everybody, Andy, that the paralysis that you see on her face and her left side will come back, everything except just the real fine motor skills of that left hand, which is
yes,
really great.
Jessica is on the road to recovery, but it's a long road and one I'm sure she'll be successful
She's going to be just fine.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Andy.